Okay, we're going to reconvene this meeting, and we're going to start with the reintroduction of commissioners and staff, starting at my far left.
Emmerich Cross, Kansas City.
Warren Gefeller, Russell.
Gary Hazlett, Lakin.
I'm Gerald Lauber from Topeka.
Aaron Ryder, Columbus.
Lauren Quayle, Sill, Hutchinson.
All right, Troy took off
Sheila.
trying to fly ahead of the storm, so.
Okay. Sheila Camus, admin support, Pratt.
Chris Tymason, legal counsel.
Mike Miller, Assistant Secretary Pratt.
Okay, well, this is the time again where we have general public comment on non-agenda items. Does anybody have anything they'd like to discuss that isn't on the agenda tonight? Would you come up, please?
Just introduce myself.
Yes, please.
Dustin King. I'm from up north in Jackson County. Just came to ask a question and see if we're doing anything about this, I guess, issue that's been around for a while from what I've seen in my area, but seems to be more and more frustration growing on it. So I wanted to kind of bring it up, which is the amount of non-resident deer hunters, in this case, that we have in our state. So rather than, doing the normal frustration session that I do on the deer surveys, I decided to take a different approach, actually do some research, look up some things, probably most of the stuff you guys know, but I'm going to reiterate it anyways, because I was surprised to see that 28% now, as of 2018, were non-resident tags sold. And it wasn't necessarily, the actual numbers of tags, but we'll get into that later. But what's more shocking is that, Nebraska was the closest one in the Midwest, and they're at 13%. Like Iowa, Wisconsin, the big, whitetail states, Iowa's at 4, Wisconsin's at 6, Missouri's at 3, and we're at 28. Now, granted, I looked at the numbers. They aren't, the physical number isn't increasing. It's actually the decline in the amount of residents that are buying tags. So, which makes me believe more that there's more frustration, from a resident standpoint, because that antlerless dropped 25% in the last 5 years, from 14 to 18, and antlered was like 15% roughly. So, I mean, that's concerning for a resident to see that kind of decline. I know we're not rising in how many tags we're selling, but I think it reflects what the deer surveys are saying and what the people are saying, in my area at least, probably all over. I'm not a social media guy, but I think probably you could poll that there as well. From a long-term perspective, I could see this being more of a problem for the youth, because if I, as a resident, lose motivation to hunt, for example, I'm not going to take my kids. They're going to continue to play video games. Their kids are going to not want to go, and it just kind of snowballs from there. So then we got even more commercialization eventually, I think, this is all going to be non-resident. Now, I will never quit, but, you can see, and it's reflected. I guess the next thing is how's that going to impact the deer numbers? Because in the deer surveys, a lot of non-residents say, we don't come here to shoot does, we come here to shoot bucks, which I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to drive all the way and pay the money and shoot does. I mean, that's not exciting. That's not what they do in the hunting videos, on TV. So is that going to affect our, maturity levels? Is that going to increase doe levels? So you got non-residents that don't have any interest to shoot does necessarily, and I think some of them do. And then you have residents that are not hunting, which probably are going to take care of most of your does, and are you going to get an imbalance sooner or later if it's not already here? So that's another concern. Also, and I agree with some outfitters and some of them I've talked to. They put age limits or inch limits on these deer, which all of us know. We're experienced hunters. All of us know it's hard to judge. When they're on the hoof, when they're walking. So people are going to make mistakes, and even if they don't, even at 140 inches, you're still going to shoot a 2-year-old. Every once in a while, you're going to shoot a lot of 3-year-olds. So I wouldn't assume that would be, considered a mature deer. I guess not to me. And again, if the residents are the ones shooting the does, if they don't have any land to hunt because it's leased or an outfitter controls it or whatever, there's nowhere to hunt. They're going to probably not hunt at all. I guess thirdly, the third point, and I'm sorry for rambling, but the financial or perceived financial loss from the not selling as many tags. potentially, if we went that route. I mean, outfitters could, I would think, could always scale back, charge more, because less work, same amount of people, same amount of, or less people and more money. I don't know what the impact would be on them. They would also not have to lease near as much ground, because they don't have near the people, therefore hypothetically releasing ground for other people, the public, to hunt again, like it used to be. As far as, how it affects, coming in, I've heard an outfitter last time said they wanted more tags and they were gonna help the community. But I mean, if we're losing, again, residents, we're the ones that's buying the equipment, the gear, the camo, the bow, the gun, the cameras, the stands, and even, the tractors and those kind of expenses. I mean, those all add up too. If you're losing those, I'm highly doubting that a non-resident is going to buy their camo in Kansas or their bow in Kansas or their gun in Kansas. They're probably going to buy it wherever they're from. So, I mean, I think that we could balance that out from a money standpoint maybe a little better. Maybe it's not as bad as a hit as we thought. I guess in the end, it feels like we're really commercializing this, and I know the hunt shows don't help, but I wish we could get more on the same page with some of the other, whitetail states that are known good whitetail states that seem to have a better plan, for this and limiting and making this more of a, it's a coveted place to come. You only get to come here every 3 or 4 years. I just feel like if we continue down this road, it's just going to be more commercialized, and that's not what hunting was originally supposed to be in my mind. So anyways, sorry for taking so much time. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any response or comments? Earlier this afternoon, we heard from the other side who want more non-resident permits. So there are two sides to that issue. Any other public comment on non-agenda items?
Tim Netto from Northern Osage County. I came here tonight to correct a statement that was made earlier this evening. Secretary Lovelace said that last night a very infamous deer poaching case took place, and the deer mount was purchased by what did he call it? A surrounding or a neighboring landowner. I want to make a correction to that statement. I bought that deer mount last night because it was poached on my land, my family's land. I've already given it to your record keeper. This is just a summary of the official Osage County police report filed by Officer Lynn Cook of Wildlife and Parks. Lynn Cook is a multi-award-winning officer. The act of criminal hunting. The poacher did unlawfully hunt and shoot without first obtaining permission of the landowner or person or in possession of the said land. Tim Netto is listed in his official document.
Are you the landowner?
My mother is.
But why would it say Tim Netto?
Because when the poacher got caught, there were people at the Monster Buck Classic that knew who owned the land. And they said, you need to call Tim, and this is his number, and he will verify. I am in charge. Wildlife and Parks, the governor's office, the state legislature has been given all kinds of documentation from my mother that I am her land manager, her representative. When the poaching case took place, my mom was in Atlanta, Georgia, and she said that I was her representative. There's another document here that simply says criminal hunting without the consent of the landowner. I'm already listed. Officer Cook's report that he filed, he signed it, but it says this said report truthfully reflects the evidence and persons I observed, the information I received. I do solemnly swear that the above foregoing inclusion attached refer is true and correct. So help me God.
Did he prepare that report at the scene or at the event?
The poacher got
No,
caught.
the report, was
The
it
report
prepared?
was February the 1st of 2012. Officer Cook called me at work on the 1st. He asked me if we had our land posted with purple paint or signs, and I said yes, we had both. He then finished his report later that day and turned it in on the same date. after he contacted me. This is the poacher's handwritten statement that he gave to 3 officers of Wildlife and Parks. This, and you have this copy also, I just typed it up verbatim, word for word.
Well, you know, Tim, there is a difference of opinion as to,
But, I'm
as
sorry.
to, you know, you have a document that you say is completely accurate, but for a few inaccuracies. And irrespective, we've kind of went through this again and again and again. And I don't, what was your purpose in coming here today?
Let me finish, I'm almost done, Mr. Lauber. The poacher states where he was. He was driving east, the deer was to his left, to the north, which is our land. He shot twice, the deer ran across the road and then died. This is a statement from the Osage County prosecuting attorney that states the poacher and his lawyer both made the statement in court that the poacher, he admitted he shot it on our land, he pled guilty. He told the judge, I think Tim should be able to keep the antlers. That didn't happen. That's past. I am listed as a victim for restitution. The reason I am here is I am not a neighboring landowner. I am the landowner. I want the statement corrected. People can have whatever opinion they want, but when you have a man plead guilty to the case, to the poaching on my land, I'm not a surrounding neighbor. I am the landowner. I just want that to be clarified. Last night, I picked up a deer that I paid $16,000 for that was poached on my property. I paid $16,000 because Wildlife and Parks invited Bass Pro Shop, a multi-billion-dollar company, to bid against a school teacher. And I had to pay $16,000 for a deer that if it were poached today on my land, I get it for free. Thank you.
Any other comments on non-agenda items? Sure.
All I ask is that when you discuss, whenever this is talked about again, that you have the truth and you know the truth and you speak the truth.
When we talk
That's it.
about it, we will try to speak the truth as we understand it to be.
And I've given you all
As
the
to
court.
what you say it is.
I have all the court documents explaining the truth. Thank you.
All right. If there is no other comment on non-agenda items, let's talk about chronic wasting disease.
All right, so I have a presentation here. Once Jason gets it set up. So, I think with the potential that chronic wasting disease has to impact our state, and the importance of deer and deer hunting in this state, figured rather than try to tackle the huge topic of chronic wasting disease all at once and have to spend a couple hours up here at some point in the future, rather than do that, we'll start just kind of diving into it a little bit at a time here, progressing through some of these meetings as we're able to. And I thought to start out, I'd just do a overview of what's going on in Kansas right now, where we are, and just a quick run through of some of the important things we'll have to be considering in the future. And some of those things we'll be diving into a little deeper at later dates. So just a quick, what is chronic wasting disease? It's a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. In other words, it's a prion disease. It's not a bacteria. It's a misfolded piece of protein. And what it causes is neurons to die and holes to form in the brain. And so the brain takes on this spongy appearance. And so chronic wasting disease is the form for cervids or deer, the deer family, so deer, elk, moose, reindeer can get it. There are other forms of it. Scrapie is the sheep form, BSE or mad cow disease is the bovine form, and there's Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is the human form, and there's a few others that are not nearly as well known. There's a mink form, there's a camel form. It's always fatal in the end. Usually the deer actually don't die directly from chronic wasting disease, but it destroys their immune system to the point that they're going to die from something else. Often it's a pneumonia respiratory issue. It takes 1.5 to 2 years before the clinical signs appear. The droopy droolers, as some of you may have heard, where the ears are drooping down, they're salivating heavily, and start to be in really poor body condition. Before that, the only way to tell a deer has chronic wasting disease is to test, and even that testing is only really starts to become effective somewhere between 3 to 6 months after the deer is infected. A few deer have shown slight resistance. Basically, that means that there are just live a little longer from it, which is a two-edged sword in that they are showing resistance, but they're also spreading prions across the landscape that much longer. And most of the cervid biologists in North America consider this to be the biggest disease threat to North American cervids, largely because it's been difficult to study and come up with answers to how to deal with it. And once you're infected with it, you can't easily get rid of it. So just a quick look, it is a North American issue. In fact, it's an international issue. We've seen it occur in South Korea and Norway have seen it. It's started kind of in the Mountain West in Colorado and has spread from there. But it's something that's a widespread issue for almost all managers, and even states that don't have or haven't detected chronic wasting disease are often have to take measures to try and prevent it occurring, and that's still the best route, is to try and keep from getting it. Just a little quicker look at our borders and what's around Kansas. We've got it on 3 sides where we actually know what's going on. South of us, Oklahoma's has had minimal sampling, and there's not much information out of there. But we do, eastern Kansas, we haven't detected it yet, but we are trying to keep track of it, and we'd like to stay that way where we have yet to detect it. Okay,
What were those yellow squares? Were those captive
so
cervids?
the yellow dots are captive cervid
Okay.
operations where it was positive, but they were depopulated. So they're not actually a captive cervid operation anymore. It's where they were detected. The red dots are where they have been and are not depopulated yet. So chronic wasting disease was first detected in a captive elk in 2001 in Harper County. And that was our first occurrence of it. That herd was depopulated, and we have yet, as you'll see, to detect it in any of the counties bordering Harper County. And we have yet to detect it in the wild herd there. It took till 2005 before we first got it in the wild herd up in Cheyenne County. And since then, it's slowly spread across the state. 2011 was the last year of statewide chronic wasting disease sampling, where we saw it pop up a little farther south down there. This data's too lean it's too thin to tell us whether that was a human assisted or if it's had already been there at low extremely low prevalence rates where we just couldn't detect it yet. And some of those counties in between those two and the Northwest, the number of samples we get in a year are very, very low. And so detectability between that's difficult. As we've progressed, we've added more and more counties. In 2018, we added 6 counties. Some of that we're just filling in because of the low sampling, we finally just got enough that we picked it up. 2019, the only county we added was Russell. And so as of January this year, that's where we stand as far as what counties we've detected chronic wasting disease in. But I included the disease zones as those thicker black lines up there. And this year we were sampling up in the northwest corner of the state. And as you can see, that entire disease zone we've detected in every county that's in that. And so some of that is potentially not adding any more counties in 2019 was more because we weren't heavily sampling in counties that had not or hadn't been detected yet. And so what we are so far, we've had 263 samples, 96 total positives. The breakdown by the different zones are the white numbers on the map. So sampling in the northwest zone, we're at 78. We didn't have any detections in the east zone, which is good news. South central, we've only detected it in a few counties along kind of the western edge of that, and so we'd hope that the low number would be low there. But 78 of the positives were from so far 204 samples in the northwest. The difference between the 204 and the 263 are the samples that were taken outside of that.
Does the South Central include the Harper County elk?
No. These numbers are just this year.
Okay.
So they're not cumulative. The initial analysis on the prevalence rate from the data we have in the Northwest indicates that we're in a 34 to 49% range for bucks that are 2.5 years and older. And with the amount of samples that we are able to get right now, we can't estimate any closer than that. We can only put it into kind of a range like that. But we're confident that, to 95% that the actual estimate falls between those within that range. Just a couple of quick breakdowns there on the bottom of the positive samples. By far, most of our samples come from bucks, which is good news. If we started to see the female numbers starting to creep up, we'd really be concerned that it's getting really high prevalence rates, because that's what's been seen in some other states. By species, we're looking at about 2/3, 1/3 breakdown between whitetails and mule deer. Just the rate of harvest, we'd kind of expect that. And where we are, we'd expect mule deer to be quite a bit lower if we were looking at our overall across the state population, but just in the Northwest, that's our mule deer stronghold. And then by age, and typical of the disease, we are very heavy into those 3.5-year or older bucks. Those are the animals that pick it up first in the population. But some of that may change as we progress. Just to show kind of where our positives have fallen, the bright red dots, which are focused up there in the Northwest, are from this year. I know that's a little hard to see. And so what I did was I plotted this out. And so the dark solid line is our cumulative through the years of positive samples. And that dotted line at the bottom are the annual totals. And so I mentioned that in 2011 was when we stopped statewide sampling. Pretty easy to see that 2015 we were in the northwest corner of the state in that zone sampling. And then if you jump Forward to 2019, where we are again, we see that jump again. But that's the total positives, and this is no different than what other states have seen dealing with chronic waste and disease. It's slow at first, and then it just starts climbing and climbing. So there's been a few things that have been produced. 2017, there was the Western states produced a recommended management actions, best practices. And then in 2018, that was expanded and adopted by the American, or the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which is the national form. And that's a pretty deep technical document to show, what they recommend as best practices. They're working or have been working on an additional document outlining other practices and deeper dive into some of the other ones that needed it here. And so it really follows these 4 sections: prevention, surveillance, management, and supporting activities, as far as what the best practices are. And so for prevention, movement prohibitions, restrictions, they recommend you don't move anything but antlers with a clean skull cap, a clean hide, or deboned meat, with some other options as far as quartering animals is potentially a next best thing, to leave the head and especially the brain matter and the spine in the field. They also recommend preventing unnatural concentrations of deer. That's baiting and feeding, other things that can happen to pull deer together, but they recommend you don't do that. And then they also recommend prohibiting the use of natural urine products. And so those are the best options as far as what can be done. While not actually prohibiting things, we definitely recommend to our hunters that they follow those as best they can. And we're constantly discussing regulations and things that could potentially help us in this aspect. And so that's one of the, so the prevention and some of those options will be stuff we'll talk a little more in depth as we get later or go to more meetings, as will most of the rest of that we follow here. Surveillance, maintaining a good idea of what's actually going on in the state, being able to look at how prevalence is changing, especially if you implement any actions to help. You want to try and make sure that you're making sure or looking at whether or not those are working effectively. And looking for where it occurs in new places, constantly scanning for that. And if we can find it sooner, we can do more. So in Kansas, we are using a 5-year rotation through the 5 disease zones. Those are marked up there with the northwest, north central, east, southwest, and south central. We rotate that through that in a clockwise direction, so we'll be in the north central this coming season. We encourage hunters to test, especially if they're in an area, hunting an area where it's already been detected or very near an area that's been detected. And none of this really happens without working with cooperators. Majority of our samples are actually taken through taxidermists assisting. And we'd like to expand that to work with other taxidermist processors and work with hunters to make it easier for them to sample. For management, Kansas does have a internal CWD management plan that was written in 2009, and we are currently working on getting that updated as part of a larger disease management plan. But we have had one. They recommend that you set harvest goals to help reduce the animals that are the most likely to be infected. One of those recommendations is to have later seasons, but those recommendations are to move, for many of the states that hunt earlier than we do, is to move it back to especially your rifle hunting, back or you harvest your most deer back into the mid to late November, and we're already hunting in early December usually. So we're in pretty good shape that way. They also recommend restricting rehabilitation of deer, and then take actions that help reduce the environmental contamination, minimize the number of prions out there to reinfect deer coming into those areas. And then supporting activities, developing communications, trying to get more information out to folks, educate your hunters on what needs to happen best, communicate with them what's going on with it. And we work with Nadia in our public affairs department to develop some of that kind of stuff. She's recently helped us put together a very nice poster to go up for like some of our rental cabins on some of our state parks to help with hunters in those to what they need to do, best disposal issues for that. We're also doing some human dimensions work. We've got a survey that's actually going on right now, looking at hunter knowledge of the disease, what actions they support, and we'll be continuing that. I'm sure that'll be we'll have an opportunity to discuss that once the final reports are done with that here at the commission. I'll present those. Education, we continue to try and educate our hunters and general public and staff on chronic wasting disease. We put out a video this past year that shows a hunter how to basically take the samples they need to have test for chronic wasting disease with a pocket knife or the same knife they field dress their animal with, and a Ziploc bag. Just to show them it's very easy to do in the field, but if you don't know where to look and what to do, you wouldn't know how to do it. So trying to do that rather than show like some videos where it's a laboratory procedure to get them out. It's very easy. We also will need in the future to probably address some of the economic impacts that chronic wasting disease can cause, as far as either changes to our deer herd. Potentially, some surveys for other states have predicted a severe loss of hunters in areas with it, and even some states have seen that recreational property values have significantly declined once chronic wasting disease was found in those areas. So just assessing that and figuring out how to go forward in the face of chronic wasting disease. Some other things, we're going to continue monitoring and surveillance in the state. We're looking at other research projects. We've got one project coming up to take a deeper look at at sampling and trying to find out a little more in detail what chronic wasting disease is doing around the state as far as prevalence by our deer management units, and look at some of what kind of landscape areas does it first appear in so that we can focus our sampling and detect it sooner. We'll continue to do human dimensions work with our hunters, trying to determine what we're looking at and what they support and how we can mutually assist each other in managing this disease. We'll continue developing communications and review and revise regulations where we need to help manage chronic wasting disease. And so that wraps up that overview of what's going on in Kansas right now, and like I said, we'll take a deeper look so that we can get into some of these other difficult topics without having to take too long.
Any questions for Levi?
So at those prevalence rates out in the Northwest, if I understand other materials I've read, we're at risk of it affecting our population.
Yes.
Because it's plenty high enough and it's in that range.
Yes.
Are we worried at all about our resident moose population affecting it?
I don't know. He didn't stop long enough for me to talk to him. So.
Okay, I wondered about him. The other question I have, and I know this is really rather irrelevant given where our elk are most of our elk are located, but I mean, elk are affected. Is this part of the conversation and something that you're at least keeping back here? Because that's part of the conversation too.
Yes. And, you know, probably our next second biggest population elk along the Arkansas River down in southwest Kansas are definitely highly at risk here. Elk tend to get it at a much lower prevalence rate than deer in the same area. A little bit of that's behavioral type stuff, but it's definitely something we're looking at and keeping track of.
So that as we move forward with regs, some of them will apply to elk as well as deer.
Potentially, yes. So.
Any other questions for Levi? I have one comment. Down the road, we may be forced to review carcass movement. We flirted around with it, took it back off the table. And I think that made sense at the time, but we may find ourselves cornered. One of the things that would resolve a lot of that is, remember, we figure there are 30, 40,000 plus deer that are taken to processing plants. While we move forward with the discussion of carcass movement, a lot of risk would be minimized if the carcasses were moved to a processing plant and properly disposed of.
Yes.
They have no way to know how. They have no way to know what a best practice is.
Yep.
They are currently paying some people just to pick them up and promise they're not being tested, and Lord knows where they go.
Yep.
So I think it would behoove us to try to figure out, if nothing else, we may have to consider putting some dumpsters out and doing something to be able to store and properly dispose of high-risk tissue.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing with the movement is it's the disposal at the end.
Yeah,
So-
and a locker plant would be absolutely happy to work with people if there was some assistance there. But if you go to Allen County, to Woodson County, to Wilson County and say, well, now we want you to dispose of this in a proper site, what is the proper site? They don't know, and they don't know what to do. So that's something I want us to keep in mind. And I'm sure you are, but I mean, are there any other questions for Levi? Yes, sir? Yeah, please, if you would.
So I guess you brought it up here for the first time I've seen, in the past couple meetings that you've had, which is the baiting or feeding sites. I mean, has that actually been, are you looking into that as actually something to restrict? And the reason I bring that up is, again, with the other states, surrounding us, they've pretty much done it with the exception of maybe Oklahoma, or at least have some restrictions around it. So I didn't.
Yeah, it's one of those things that without accounting for long distance movements, we really can't tackle short distance movements. It is something that's on the Human Dimension Survey to see where our Kansas hunters are going to hit the line as far as what is an acceptable plan that way, because we don't want to, jump in and do something too early and then have it completely overturned and go backwards. And so, yes, it's one of those very tough things to tackle with the topic, and it's a problem in relation to chronic wasting disease. Potentially, it can be the issue if somebody develops a treatment for it or cure for it, because that's likely the way we'd have to deliver it. But it's anything that's a problem can also be adapted, I think, to be a solution to it too, and we want to work with folks to do that. But yes, it's definitely something we're discussing very hard right now. So.
Thank you.
Any other question, David?
Okay, my question is, how is it transmitted from deer to deer or elk to elk?
It can be through behavior, as far as potentially, we're not really sure about how it transmits, but orally through behavior, licking, whatever, can be one route. We've also seen that it can infect deer environmentally, so it's in the environment, which would be why issues such as feeders could be a problem. There's some research showing plants take it up, so they could potentially take it in that way.
Okay, now, as a landowner, and we see a deer that's acted not right, do we contact our law enforcement officer and give them the location, or what?
Yeah, yep. And in those cases, any sick suspect animal will come check out, and every one of those animals that we encounter, we try to test.
Yeah, man, I'm kind of dumb on this kind of stuff, but Gerald made the comment of properly disposing of and such. What about, can it be, the spores be spread like a semi hits a deer and then driving across the country? Can it be spread that way?
Potentially. We also don't know what dosage deer have to have before they get it, so it may be that, you know, the handful here or there is not such an issue until it builds up. But the biggest thing, I mean, it could be that way, but minimal material on a deer, but that site could be then contaminated for a while where it was hit. The recommended practice is to put carcasses in a landfill.
Yeah.
The next best one is to put them back where they came from. Wherever the deer was harvested, the carcass should go back to that point. So,
Okay. And my last question, on which I probably already know the answer to this one. You mentioned that it's the same spores like mad cow disease.
it's a similar, it's, this is the deer version versus the cow version, yeah.
That it cannot be passed on?
You mean to humans?
No, to cattle, like brucellosis and everything else.
It's not been observed yet. There's been a laboratory study where they directly injected it into cattle and did have cattle that were infected, but it took a very specific dose right to the animal.
You
It's
do
not
have
been seen yet.
considerable weight
But
difference
there's,
there. too.
yeah, but there's definitely concern that as it originally came from Scrapie is the thought, that it could change again.
All
So
right.
it's always a concern with almost every disease.
Yeah, all right,
So-
thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for
I
Levi?
got a question. A number of our deer, or our deer hunters, process their own deer,
Yep.
quarter their deer. To Gerald's point, if disposal is an issue for the packing houses, it would be same issue. So is there some proper way to dispose of it?
Same thing, landfills are the best option. Again, the other route is to take it back where it came from. Without being in a, a lined landfill, burying's not really good. So landfilling is by far the best. And then as the backup would be to take the carcass back where it came from.
I
What do you mean, where you shot it?
Yeah, where you shot it.
I have been to Wyoming, and it's my recollection that they will have some dumpsters out for sportsmen. to
In a
dispose
few
in the high-risk
places, and
areas.
some of the other eastern states have gone that route, and that's something we're
That's what
discussing.
I think we
so-
need to look at.
So,
That way, we don't have to worry about putting it in a landfill or this type of thing. You know, you don't solve the problem if you put it back where it came from. It's just you didn't spread it to the next
yeah,
10 acres or the next quarter section. It's just wherever it is, it stays there.
Yeah.
And the
And it's
fear
one of-
is that it travels at 55 mile an hour.
yep. It's one of those cases where, every little bit from all our hunters is definitely a help. So,
Any other questions for Levi? If not, let's go on to what will now appear to be very benign discussion about Fort Riley deer.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is the KR 115-25-9A, which is our military installation deer seasons and bag limits. These are going to look pretty typical to what we've seen over the last several years, with maybe the one exception is Smoky Hill. They've basically requested that they have the same seasons as the regular statewide. And so then the differences from our regular statewide season at Fort Riley are additional archery days for individuals authorized by Fort Riley to include the period from September 1st to September 13th and January 11th to January 31st. Those are typically individuals that were either deployed or going to be deployed and would not have an opportunity to hunt otherwise. So that's those few individuals that they authorize. They'd also like additional days for the designated person season, which is the youth and disabled season, from October 10th through October 12th, which replaces the pre-rut season, which they do not want to hold on the fort. And then the firearm season dates of November 27th through November 29th, and then December 15th through December 23rd. It adjusts the dates to hunt with firearm on the fort, but they don't get any more days. It's still 12 days like the rest of the state. Those are the Fort Riley differences from our regular state seasons. The Fort Leavenworth ones are, they want the open firearm season for deer November 14th and 15th, November 21st through November 22nd, November 26th through November 29th, December 5th through December 6th, and December 12th through December 13th. Again, that just adjusts the dates. They still only get 12 days like the rest of the state. They want the extended firearm season for antlerless only deer to be the January 1st through January 24th dates, and then the extended archery season for antlerless only whitetail deer to be January 25th through the 31st. Deer hunters can use one antlerless only permit on Fort Riley in the subunit A, or subunit A, or the Smoky Hill subunit 4A. And then a deer hunter may, they want to have 5 antlerless whitetail deer permits at Fort Leavenworth, which is subunit 10A. And so these military installation season dates would be discussed, or should be completed at the public hearing in June. That's when we handle those usually. And with that, I'll take any questions about these.
Anybody have any questions for Levi on this particular matter? Public? Okay. If not, go on to the next workshop item.
All right. The next item is the big game 4 series permanent regulations, which starting with 115.4-2, which is general provisions. Because of the issue of chronic wasting disease, as we've previously discussed, and one of the alternatives to being completely deboned meat is to allow quarter carcasses and with no spinal column or head attached. We would recommend that we change the proof of sex regulations on antlerless deer to allow for hunters to actually quarter their carcasses and then leave a portion of the hide with the visible sex organs attached to a quarter as proof of sex for antlerless deer. Or they could, as they currently can, photo register their deer and actually completely debone it. This would allow hunters to voluntarily go ahead and remove the portions of the carcass we want left out there in the field without placing an actual restriction in regulation on them. Hunters would have an either sex permit are already allowed to do this because they have a permit that allows the taking of a either sex animal.
So Levi, on this one, I was I had to read this 3 or 4 times and then go back to other stuff to reference it to kind of wrap it. Are you saying there's an either or, they can leave the head attached as it is now, or you're requiring, this is requiring to take the head off and leave sex organs, or are we just adding that option is what we're doing?
Let's see, I think we added the option here.
Okay,
Make sure I get the wording right. Yep.
okay. So they can, as it is now, leave the head attached, or if they choose to go ahead, quarter it out, leave
Yep.
sex organs attached. Either
Yep.
way is good for
Yep.
now. Okay.
And this would apply, this is all big game animals, so this would also include
Okay.
elk and pronghorn.
Okay, any discussion on this with Levi? This is a workshop item, will be voted on, what do we got, next meeting?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, Levi, you want to go to
All
the
right.
next one?
Next one is 115. Oh,
Mr. Chairman, comment from the public on this.
Do we have a comment from the public?
Okay, I just want to make sure we had that opportunity.
Okay, the next item is 115-4-4, which is legal equipment. There's new equipment comes up, and usually we look at it for quite a while. We had the request to look at draw locking devices that lock a vertical bow at full draw to be allowed as a legal device. And the recommendation is that we remove that restriction on those, which would allow them to be used by any archery hunter.
Okay, is there any comment from the public on that, or from, please?
Gary Cook from Fort Scott. We've already got the crossbows. What do we need with draw locks? I don't see what we need those for.
And I guess one of the thoughts, and not that I care a lot either way, was if we're allowing crossbows, why not allow the draw lock?
The draw locks are, I've tried shooting one and they're not very accurate because you're not holding any pressure. It's hard to hold your arm out here and hold it steady.
And you've mentioned that in a previous meeting, and I believe you, but there are people who feel like it would be helpful to their particular situation, and I'm not really sure why, but I don't know if I see a big difference between the two as far as a mechanical.
Right. Of course, I was against the crossbows too.
I understand.
I was in favor of them for handicap, but not for just anybody.
I understand that. And you weren't alone.
No, I know.
So, I mean, that's kind of my feeling. I'm not sure I'm not sure there's a real physics distinction or how they really work. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, other than you say one may be less accurate.
I think they are.
That is important, but I
Yeah.
don't know if it's,
With the crossbow, you can at least pull it into your shoulder to hold pressure against it. With the draw locks, you cannot.
okay.
Is the draw any different on a crossbow versus a regular bow with a draw lock?
Yes.
Does
Yes.
it make it easier for somebody to draw a bow if they have a lock?
No.
No.
already.
The draw lock, it's for somebody shooting a 70-pound bow or whatever. The only advantage it is you don't have to move because you've still got to draw it by hand
Right.
once.
Okay.
And
Or you can stand on it and draw it, or
Yeah,
draw.
some of them are designed to use your foot to hold the bow while you can use both hands.
are they on the vertical bows too?
Yep.
Are they?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know,
Well-
they've came out with new stuff since I was messing with it.
Your point is well taken, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
I've got some thoughts.
Okay?
And this applies not just to the draw locks, it applies to many of the innovations that come along, similar to the thermal imaging things that we discussed this afternoon, but it's the issue of fair chase. And there's a lot of regulations that have been made in recent years that seem to have the common goal of making it easier for hunters. Most of these changes haven't been to make it easier to gain access or to become better hunters. Making it easier means making it easier to kill game. We have game cameras that ping your phone and show you right where the deer are. We've gone from traditional muzzle loaders that are 50 or 75-yard weapons to muzzle loaders that are accurate at 250 plus yards. We've gone from archery to crossbows that are accurate at 50 yards in the hand of a beginner. We erect elevated stands in wheat fields where we can stay warm and out of the wind, drink our coffee, move around, and shoot 300-yard shots or more at grazing deer. We pile corn in the fields, train the deer to come to the corn, and then shoot them. And we call this hunting. Theodore Roosevelt's credited with articulating the idea of fair chase in about the 1880s. It's the same time that market hunting was exploiting our resources. Economic gain was the primary issue, and it was seen as a severe threat to the resource and to us, ultimately, because of that. Out of the exploitation came the hunting ethic and came the conservation ethic that's guided the conservation and the hunting for 150 years in our country. The exploitation was the motivation for the development of the ethics. So if we look back at the past 150 years of conservation in our country and the past 60 years in our state, we've seen it go from the pendulum from money and greed and market hunting to some tremendously successful conservation processes, practices, and ethics. And it's swinging back. We don't sell meat anymore. We sell antlers, we sell access, we sell selfie opportunities, bragging rights. We see our natural resources as commodities instead of resources. We value the outcome over the process of hunting. We value the economic benefit over the intangible resources. And we ignore the principle of the democracy of hunting as having benefit to all citizens, not just wealthy and privileged. We want to call the appeal to the North American model when we tell people wildlife belongs to the state and to the people of the state, not to the landowners. But we sometimes seem to forget all those other 6 pillars, which include that concept of fair chase. And it's time to realize that in some of our decisions that there's ethical dimensions, not just practical and economic. And without retaining a foundation that includes the ethics of things like fair chase, how far are we going to go with innovations? And at some point, and I'm probably over-exaggerating, and I'm probably speaking in many regards to preaching to the choir, but why not just sell permits on Amazon for $5.99 to do whatever the heck you want? If we don't have an ethical base for things and consider that in the decisions we make, I find that very concerning. So it's not just about, they're not about cheating, but we have to consider what does making it easier for the hunter, what does that really mean?
I have a Weatherby Magnum. I don't use it all the time, but I have several rifles that have been modified and changed to where they shoot more accurately, they shoot flatter, they have more ballistic coefficient because of the loads, because of the technology. I don't consider that as reducing the amount of fair chase. I don't consider reducing the fair chase from using a long bow to a compound bow. Yes, that made it easier. It gave you an edge, but I don't think that affected fair chase. Lauren, I understand what you're saying, but technology, I just don't think we need to go back to 45, 70s and round bullets. Yes, it was harder to kill a deer then, and it made it harder to hunt. But at what point do we say we're done with the technology? I guess these things occur incrementally. I just didn't see the draw lock as being fundamentally different than a crossbow, and I felt crossbows were probably okay. But I know, so I hear you, but I don't know if, I heard this when we were going to allow scopes on muzzle loaders. Oh my God, we can't do that. That's not fair. And I still think it's a pretty fair chase because I have a difficult time. It's a lot easier to hunt with a center fire than it is with a muzzle loader. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. We'll vote on this next month. Are there other questions from the commission? And you can respond too. And any other comments from the public? Some of the stuff you said, I agree.
I fully agree with everything she said. And when do we draw that line?
Yeah, and I agree with some of it, and some of it I don't necessarily, so. All right. Well, Levi, let's move on.
All right, next one is 115-4-6, which is the firearm management units. We are to be more in line with the surrounding management and to provide a little more option to hunters. The south end of Deer Management Unit 10 falls below Unit 19. It's that chunk of blue that's below the red line of 19 on the map up there. And so it was a small triangle that you could only use one antlerless permit in. And when it was surrounded by areas that you could use up to 5. So we had concern from landowners and hunters in that area that they would like to be more in line with what's going on around them. And then also up there on the north side, the boundaries were extremely confusing because they followed many little side roads and a few complaints kind of down into that notch there in the middle of 19 as far as deer numbers. And so rather than changing the entire, all the main boundaries of our first 18 units, we're looking at expansion of the urban unit, DMU 19, from the red boundary on the map there to the new thick black boundary up there. And I will, rather than read through every little road and junction on that goes into that boundary, I'll let you refer to the map up there as far as what changes we'd be looking at.
Any questions for Levi? Okay, go on.
And that finishes the regulations in 115.4 that we are looking at changes.
And these are all March vote.
And yeah,
We'll vote in March.
Okay, the next.
So the next item is the Deer 25 series, where we look at setting the antlerless, what number of permits can be used in what units, and then the seasons. And the first item that's come up that's new since the last meeting was that we were getting a lot due to the flood damage this year. We were seeing a lot of crop damage complaints down around the Elk City and Barren Stick wildlife areas, also known the Buffalo Ranch. While our state property there would only allow one permit to be used for antlerless whitetails. And so we're recommending adding the Elk City and Barronstick wildlife areas to the list of our state wildlife areas that allow the 4 additional antlerless permits.
Okay, any questions for Levi on that one? Questions from the public?
So when you buy these tags, these permits, none of them are marked valid on state land or not valid on state land?
The first one is marked that way, and then they all have the units on them.
It's not easy to
not
tell.
marked.
Yeah, not easy to tell.
You can tell which one is your first one, but it took me a year or two to figure out that I was putting, in theory, the potential wrong one on something else. So you have to really pay attention as to which one's your first one. And it is not easy to be marked.
And the thing, I found it confusing, because in the book here, it says the first, but in the reg, it says only one. It doesn't say it's the first one. And the book doesn't include 16 this year. Which further confused me. It's not hard to do anyway. But then I got out my tags and started looking at them, and I'm asking mostly from an enforceability perspective for those of us that hunt around state lands, and for law enforcement, it's just you're asking people to on their honor take one from state land and not the rest. Because if the tags aren't marked, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Right,
So
your
the
first one.
The
first
first,
says valid statewide on public and private land.
and then the others, the way I look at it was hold them up, and one of them has more little numbers.
Those are
And so,
there's only a few wildlife areas that allow more than one to be used, and those are listed in the regs.
Okay.
Lauren, it isn't easy to fit. It took me 2-3 years to figure it out.
There's also an issue with the size of the permits and being able to print all of the, I mean, if you're going to print all
Yeah.
those wildlife areas on there, we wouldn't have room to do that. Point well taken.
Yes, it is. Any other discussion for Levi? Does that answer your question, Lauren?
Yes
Order.
and no.
Okay. All right.
Now,
We're also looking at our either species antlerless only permits up in Deer Management Unit 1 in response to landowner complaints about crop damage specifically caused by mule deer. That is actually set through Secretary's orders as far as the number of those permits issued. And I'm still currently looking at the population surveys to determine if those will issue any up there or not for those. So then, after that, it would be the season dates. And everything pretty well follows what we've done historically, except that we'll have recommending more days in January for whitetail antlerless hunting, and be 10 days in the short season, 17 days in the middle season, and 24 in the long season. And so that's would then give us the youth and disabled season being September 5th through September 13th. Early muzzleloader season would start on September 14th, concurrently with the archery season, and then would end on September 27th, excuse me. Archery starts on the 14th, ends on December 31st. The pre-rut antlerless season, whitetail antlerless only season would be October 10th through October 12th. Regular firearm season would be December 2nd through December 13th. The first extended whitetail antlerless season would be January 1st through January 10th. The second would be the 1st of January through the 17th in 2021. The third would be the 1st through the 24th in 2021. And then the extended archery season in DMU 19 would be the 25th through the 31st. And so those would be the recommended season dates for this upcoming 2020 to 2021 deer seasons.
Any questions for Levi?
Sorry for all the questions.
It's all right.
So with extending these, Levi, and I know, again, you've heard from me on this already, but I kind of want to get it out there. Have we done an official study on how many shed bucks? You know, I mean, I have 2 right now, and yes, I track them all the time. I have 2 right now that have already shed, whether they're, you know, wounded or whatever the reason may be. So that would be my concern with extending that, which I'm sure other people's concern as
Yeah.
well.
And I've looked at our harvest the last couple of years. We're looking deeper back in time now, but for the last couple of years, we have harvested between 800 and 1,000 shed deer. I can't give you the exact yearly numbers off the top of my head right now. But from those deer, we're seeing that about 25% of those are harvested in January. The other 75% are during regular seasons. So that amounts to about 216, 17 deer shed bucks a year killed in January. I will certainly be keeping an eye on that going forward if we do extend the season lengths. But that amounts to needing over 100 square miles for one of those deer across the state. So, and I think that many of the hunters that take those deer are the ones that, you know, they want a deer. And so we want to give them an opportunity to get a deer. I think the ones that would like to grow those animals out are the ones that take their time and make sure they identify and are okay with, you know, maybe not having a deer that year. But yes, we'll certainly be paying attention to that, and I'm trying to go back in time and look deeper into those harvest numbers to see what we've seen in past years.
Any other questions? Okay. You done?
That's all I have, sir.
Did an excellent job, Levi. There's no other question for Levi. We're going to send him back to his seat. And I don't have any more business. We have nothing to vote on tonight, no public hearing. Do we need to set any future meeting dates?
Yeah, August, did we set August at the last meeting? Yes, I think we did maybe talk about in Beloit, yeah. So we have August.
What is the date of that August meeting?
It's the 20th
Okay.
in Beloit with a,
Ring neck to
ring net
Brent?
visit in the morning is the plan. So we haven't got everything in detail yet, but that's the plan, to tour ring neck in the morning.
Do you want to go through the dates real fast?
March 26th at the Kansas Historical Society in Topeka. April 23rd in Hutchinson at the Hutchinson Zoo. June 25th at New Strong, which is just north of Burlington, New Strong Community Center. And August 20th then in Beloit, and I don't have the location yet.
Okay. All right. Any other questions to come before the group?
We'll go ahead and set those September and November dates at the next meeting, so
Okay.
think about those
All right.
as you're planning forward.
All right. We'll need September and October.
September and November.
September, November, okay. All right. Meeting adjourned.